Okay, so I'm back with a new set of 15 minutes, and I don't think it will take me this long to go through a few more slides. Um, so here we go. Let's go right into the presentation mode here. Okay, so where were we? Your next pitfall that seems to be tripping you up is misunderstanding the question. Um, reading it and then maybe believing it's asking one thing when it's really asking something else. This kind of goes hand in hand with the last one, like maybe you miss a detail of the question. But take the time to actually make sure you know what the question is asking, you know the focus of the question. Otherwise, you might just get it wrong simply because you thought the question was asking something else. And I think that test creators kind of bank on that, like you're misunderstanding. Some of the answers are purposefully incorrect if someone thought the question was asking something different. So on this one, this was that Eat the Rainbow passage that you had read on Albert. And in the fourth paragraph, right? And it's kind of like fourth, fifth, the way they kind of break it up, lines 19 through 25. I have them right here for you. The question is asking what further evidence could the writer use to strengthen the conclusion, right? And then it follows up with which of the following pieces of evidence would best achieve this purpose, right? And this purpose is referencing back to strengthening the conclusion. So what you can't accidentally misunderstand is, the fact that he wants to improve the conclusion, not the entire essay, or not what would meet the purpose of his essay, right? So I think that that's a little bit tricky, and you have to make sure you're looking for evidence that supports the conclusion. And what we know about the structure of an essay, in the conclusion, you're extending the ideas out, talking about more implications. So what now? So a lot of people care. What should they do? And given what he's saying, right, his whole implication is that, consumers should really take their power that they have and change the trend so that farmers or anybody who's creating food for us, they're not adding these unnatural things to our food, right? So that's the idea that he's trying to say, like, hey, now that we know this, let's make a change. Since that's his purpose and his conclusion, the right answer for this one is A. If the conclusion had examples of consumer warnings that indicate synthetic additives in food, that would help consumers to avoid them, thus using their power to like shift the trend, right? So this makes sense for the conclusion. Now, most of you guys either pick C or E. I think it was about equal in your incorrect choices. And I understand why C and E were your choices, because C and E both apply to the passage, right? There are already examples in the passage of C, right? And there is already information that doesn't really say that they're going to harm consumers, but that they're, definitely not natural, right? So I understand that if the author were to use either of these details to support the body of the essay, it is that's logical, that makes sense, but that's not what the question is asking. So you have to really make sure that you pick the answer that best matches what the question is asking. So kind of an overview of the solution here. If you're feeling like the question is tricky, you read the question and you're like, what is this asking? Reread it and paraphrase it. Take the time to put it into your own words. Break it down if you have to. Take the time to figure it out. Figure out what is it actually looking for. Or even if you thought you understood the question, but then you read all the answers and things just feel off. It's one of those times when you're like, what? And you have no idea at all. You feel very lost. Then try to reread the question, try to paraphrase it, see if you can really figure out what the question is directly asking you, to see if it's a little bit easier. And in all honesty too, if you find a question like this that is so darn confusing for you that it's taking up too much of your time, the best advice is to pass it, is to skip it. What you don't want to do is spend an inordinate amount of time on one question that you may get wrong in the end and not get to questions toward the end of the exam that you could have gotten right. So given that this is a time test, certainly try this strategy when you're practicing and there is no time constraint, But on the actual test or when you guys take your midterm, definitely think about, am I taking too much time on this? Am I so confused by this that I should just skip it? And if so, do so. If you have time at the end, you could always go back. And then the next piece to remember is the exam questions, they stick to those categories that are outlined in that initial multiple choice packet that I had given you, like week 1. So review that. Look at that list of categories of multiple choice questions. So if you're having trouble figuring out what is the question asking me, if you've sort of internalized these categories, you can probably, pop it into one of those categories. Oh, this is one of those types of questions, right? This is a purpose question or a claim question right? So think about learning those a little bit or internalizing those a little bit. And then after eliminating the answers that you know are wrong, and this is one of those strategies for you have 2 left, take the time to compare each of the answers you have left to the question, one at a time. Like look at the question, read the answer. Do that a couple of times with one, really try to see does it match exactly, and then do the same thing with the second one to see if you have the best answer for what the question is asking. And then your final pitfall is that you're seeming not to use enough context to answer the question, because it seems like sometimes you'll pick wrong answers, that if you had used either the passage as a whole and you thought about the passage as a whole, or the couple of sentences before and after, you may be able to get the right answer. So remember that answering these multiple choice questions is about understanding the entire passage, and all of the elements of the passage. And if it's asking you a question about a specific line or a specific paragraph, you have to know how it relates to the rest of the passage, right? It's going to be hard for you to pick the right answer in the vacuum of just that line. So you can't just hunt and peck and move around and look for answers as you go. You really have to understand the passage first and then answer the questions and use the context of the passage. So this one goes back to that Santa Ana text that we know pretty well. And it asked about how the author was using nervousness and depression, why she put quotation marks around those words. And now, in the context of that sentence itself, it would be a little bit tricky maybe to get the right answer. It's saying whenever and wherever phone blows, doctors hear about headaches and nausea and allergies, about nervousness and about depression. And now I understand that like the sentence before and after this don't necessarily help you here, but your understanding of her sort of purpose and her angle and what she's talking about in the entire passage would really help you here, especially if you got it narrowed down to a few. And obviously, like the context of that sentence itself, if you looked at the fact that she lists headaches, nausea, and allergies, these things that are, scientifically proven to be true, next to these ideas of nervousness and depression in quotations, that also might help. I mean, I guess there is enough in the sentence to help you, so both would help, because the correct answer is D, that she's suggesting the symptoms cannot be scientifically explained. People, they put the air quotes around things that are like, oh, supposedly, right? So that's the way she's using it. A lot of you guys picked C, call attention to the most serious of medical problems. But if you really thought about that, and you thought about her whole kind of angle of this, it doesn't fit. And logically, it doesn't make sense. Nervousness and depression are not the most serious medical problems, especially when you think about here, she's just implying that these things are happening, and they can't be scientifically traced back to the winds, but it seems like they are. So again, if you thought about the passage as a whole, you probably would have been able to select that right answer a little bit easier. So just kind of keep that in mind. So advice there. Oops, not yet. Well, there. Advice for how do you fix that pitfall there, or avoid the pitfall. Make sure you're reading and noting the big ideas, the strategies, the shifts initially when you read the passage. If you already have a really good understanding of the passage, you're gonna do better when you come to these questions, and you'll know what context to kind of pull back to. This really just highlights and underlines our initial solution is actively read, right? Really actively read the passage. Look for direct evidence in the passage. I had mentioned that before. A lot of times you're going to find the answer in the passage. And use your awareness of the passage as a whole to help guide you. Mentioned that already. And whenever the question is saying in context, this line means this, or this word means this, a lot of times just consider, like, at least look at the sentence or two before and after just to see, like, are they relating to what is being said? And if they're not, don't confuse yourself. Definitely. I know that sometimes we've talked about how if you use, too much of the before and after when it's asking about a specific word, it can sometimes get confusing. But I think just use your judgment, right? Use your ability to critically analyze and look at the context enough before and after to see, is this author just restating something that he or she already said or countering something that they had said previously? It will really help if you at least entertain the context, right? Like, think about it, consider it. So that brings us to our final little slide. It's time for you to apply these strategies. I highly recommend that today, while you are home on your snow day, that you're logging in to Albert, complete your online multiple choice number 2 with these tips in mind. Or if you've already done that, some of you have, you can pull out your hard copy passage that you have for your next go time and apply these strategies to that. Both of these will help you prepare for your midterm, where you will have an actual AP exam set of multiple choice to complete in the hour-ish. So as this positive bunny is reminding you, even if you're struggling, right, you got to remember the times you have succeeded, you're going to survive, you're going to get better at this, you're going to make it through. I believe in you, and best of luck.